When I was 8, I already understood one thing clearly. Some kids are born to be loved unconditionally, and some kids, like me. That Christmas, the tree in our living room nearly touched the ceiling, lights glowing golden and bright, but my heart felt as cold as the snow swirling outside. My younger sister, Kayla, squealed with joy as she tore open the shimmering wrapping of a talking smart doll, the latest craze, priced at no less than $200. Meanwhile, I carefully unwrapped my gift to reveal a pair of thick gray socks and a box of drawing pencils from a discount store. My mom smiled gently. "You love drawing, Chloe. This is more practical than some flashy toy." I didn't say a word, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I was used to it. We lived in a two-story blue gray house in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place that from the outside made everything look fine. My dad, Martin Turner, was an accountant for a local trucking company. My mom, Janet, taught middle school English. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. The problem wasn't money. The problem was how love got distributed. Kayla was 2 years younger than me, with golden hair, sparkling blue eyes, and a laugh that could light up a room. She was everything my parents seemed to value. She learned fast, spoke smoothly, and always knew how to draw attention. I, dark brown hair, tan skin, quiet nature, was often described as the kid who plays well alone. I remember when I was 10 and the school hosted a county-wide art competition. I painted a large canvas of an old street in the rain. It won second place and was displayed at the city library. I begged my parents to come with me to the award ceremony. My mom said she had to make up a class, and my dad told me, "It's the first Monday of the week, sweetheart. I can't skip a team meeting. Besides, painting won't get you into college." I took the bus alone that day. The following week, Kayla had a ballet recital. Mom took the whole day off, and Dad reminded me repeatedly not to be late so we could all go cheer her on. I sat in the third row, watching my parents beam as Kayla took a bow. As the stage lights dimmed, Dad said, as if declaring a future fact, "She's really got talent. We need to invest wisely." Invest, a word I thought belonged to stocks, not children. Another time, I came home from an art summer camp with a few portrait sketches and landscape drawings. I'd spent nearly all my lucky money to attend. I proudly showed Mom my favorite pieces. She glanced through them and tucked them back into my folder. "Chloe, don't let art blur reality. You should focus more on math and science. Drawing is nice, but it won't pay the bills." I nodded, but something inside me cracked. Through these little comments, day after day, month after month, I learned to shrink. Even when I aced a history exam, Mom would still ask, "How did Kayla do in piano today?" Even when I taught myself to build a 3D model for a tech project, Dad would hand me Kayla's report card and say, "She got another A+." It wasn't that I didn't try. No matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. I came to realize that in their eyes, Kayla deserved to be nurtured, while I was expected to figure things out on my own. My name is Chloe Turner. I just turned 24, and I've spent nearly 2 decades trying to prove I was just as worthy as my sister. But on the day I stepped on stage to receive my college diploma, having paid for every cent of my education myself, under the bright spotlight and a room bursting into applause, that was when my parents finally saw me. And their faces, pale as ashes, are etched into my memory forever. I entered freshman year of high school with a quiet resolve burning like coals under cold ash. If no one was going to push me forward, I'd carve the path myself. Grant High School sat in southeast Columbus, where most students treated school like a formality. But I didn't. I sat in the front row, raised my hand even when my heart pounded like a drum. Not for attention, just to affirm that my effort mattered. I signed up for the business club, a silent challenge to my dad, who once said art was a frivolous hobby and finance held real value. What he didn't know was that I chose business not to please him, but to understand how the world works, and to own my place in it. At our first club meeting, I sat among students who probably learned how to shake hands in elementary school. Crisp button-ups, leather folders, confident stares. I wore a worn-out t-shirt and scuffed canvas shoes, but my mind was sharp like a freshly honed blade. I didn't speak much, just observed, took notes, and waited. My chance came in October when the school launched a startup competition. The prompt: develop a business idea to address a specific local problem. For 2 weeks, I practically slept with my laptop, lived off instant noodles, and worked through printer ink. I built an app that connected high school students with local grocery stores for flexible work shifts so they could earn extra money without hurting their grades. At the pitch presentation, my palms were slick, but my voice was steady. After I finished, the room fell silent, then erupted in applause. I didn't just win at the school level. I was chosen to represent Central Ohio at the state round. I didn't take first place there, but my project was featured in a statewide email as a practical digital solution with real community impact. When the principal called me up to the stage to receive my award, my mom wasn't there. She was busy taking Kayla to try on dresses for the fall dance. I didn't cry. I simply snapped a photo of the certificate with my old phone and emailed it to myself, like I always did, documenting a journey no one else cared to see. I started working evenings at a local bakery from 4 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., 7 days a week. Cleaning the kitchen wasn't glamorous and didn't require creativity, but it paid for my textbooks, tutoring sessions, and paintbrush cleaner. I learned to function on 3 hours of sleep and still wake up on time. I turned down birthday invites and hangouts to finish outlines or submit scholarship apps ahead of deadline. My GPA never dipped below 4.0 for 3 straight years. My homeroom teacher called me the most determined student he'd ever taught. I didn't tell him I had sticky notes taped to my bedroom wall that read, "If no one's going to invest in you, make yourself profitable." In 11th grade, I came across information about a special admissions program at Braxton University, a prestigious school in Pennsylvania known for applied business. I gritted my teeth and applied. When the interview invite arrived, I thought it was a mistake. But no, it was addressed to me. Chloe Turner, the girl who scrubbed bakery counters with blistered hands but never missed a day of school. The interview was on Zoom. The interviewer was Sandra Holbrook, Associate Dean. When I presented the app I had submitted to the 10th grade competition, now upgraded into a beta version tested with friends, she nodded several times, her eyes lighting up with interest. At the end of our talk, she said, "You're not just a good fit. You're exactly the kind of student we want, someone who understands real value through real experience." I got my acceptance letter before Kayla, who had also applied to Braxton, backed by recommendation letters, extracurricular achievements, and a decent but not outstanding transcript. I shared the news with my mom during dinner, in between the clinking of spoons and forks. She only asked, "What program did you apply to again?" I replied, "The joint program in business and data analytics." My dad let out a sigh. "Why make it so complicated? Your sister's going into law. At least that sounds practical." 2 weeks later, Kayla received her own acceptance into the regular law program. That night, the whole house lit up like a party. Twinkling lights out front, a custom cake with her name and bright white icing. I stood at the sink, washing the leftover dishes, feeling empty. No one asked how I planned to afford tuition, but I'd already done the math. With a partial scholarship from Braxton, savings from 3 years of part-time work, and a student loan, I could cover at least the first year. The rest, I'd figure out. That night, I sat alone under the starry spring sky, not to dream, but to remind myself, light doesn't only come from the sun. Some of us have to glow in the dark. I'm one of them. That same evening, I was chopping carrots in the kitchen when my mom called from the living room. "Chloe, come out here for a moment. Your dad and I want to talk." That sentence rang like an alarm. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped into the living room, where Dad sat cross-legged in an armchair, wineglass in hand, the overhead light casting a sharp look on his face. Mom sat beside him, fingers laced, calculating expression in place. Dad looked up from his phone with the polite, almost fake tone he used whenever he had something hard to say. "You know Braxton is an expensive school," he began. I nodded, waiting for the rest. "Your mom and I talked it through. With our current budget, we can only afford tuition for one of you." My chest tightened. Kayla chose law. It's a structured path with strong prospects. That environment suits her better, and honestly, we believe in her long-term potential. I stood still, face unreadable. Mom jumped in. "You've always been independent, Chloe. You're stronger than she is, and you can figure things out. Kayla needs a stable environment to thrive." Dad continued, voice even like he was reading a finance report. "Braxton is an investment. With Kayla, we see a likely return. With you, the direction's still uncertain. You're talented, yes, but art and freelance business are risky. We can't gamble." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I got into Braxton too," I said slowly. "Applied business program, partial scholarship. I have the highest GPA in class. I won a statewide business plan competition." Dad set down his wineglass and shook his head. "We're not saying you're less capable, but Kayla needs a launch pad. You've always known how to stand on your own." Mom gave my hand a pat, cold and hollow. "You can take out a federal loan. Or consider other paths. Maybe start at a community college. Plenty of students do that." "You don't need a fancy place to succeed," Dad added. "Smart people adjust their expectations to match reality." I said nothing, just returned to my room, closed the door, and sat on the floor. Their unspoken "you deserve it" to Kayla echoed in my head. They never said it directly, but it was everywhere. In how they lit up when she showed them her essays, in their sparkling eyes when she put on her white lab coat, in the nightly tea left at her door, but never mine. The next day, while Mom drove Kayla to shop for a new laptop and dorm luggage, I walked to the city library. In my bag was Braxton's scholarship letter, damp with palm sweat. I sat for 3 hours in the old reading room, flipping through student loan guides, highlighting outside scholarships in red ink. I didn't go home that night. I went to my grandmother's. The only person in the family who ever looked at me without comparison-colored lenses. She was baking cinnamon toast, the kitchen thick with buttery warmth. When I finished telling her everything, she didn't say a word. Just pulled her chair closer and laid a hand on my shoulder. "Chloe," she said, "people invest in stocks because they fear missing out, but no one ever invests in a rock because they don't believe it can turn into gold. Their biggest mistake is judging what they don't understand." I laughed through my tears. "Not gold, Grandma." "No," she said. "You're iron forged in fire. Gold isn't strong enough to hold up a world, but iron can." She wasn't wealthy. She lived on benefits and Grandpa's pension, but the next morning she took me to the bank and co-signed my first tuition loan. I came back home that evening. My mom didn't ask where I'd been. Dad was still reading the newspaper, and Kayla was cutting out pictures for her art class project. As I walked up the stairs, she looked up at me, a little hesitant. "You okay?" I nodded. "I'm going to Braxton." Mom turned her head. "Chloe?" I thought. "I'll handle it myself," I said, then kept walking without waiting for a response. When I closed the door to my room, the ache was still there, but so was a different kind of silence. Not one of disappointment, but of someone finally stepping out of someone else's expectations and into their own truth. It wasn't easy, but it was real. No fireworks, no applause, just me, a planner full of scholarship deadlines, and the soft glow of my desk lamp, the one thing in that house that always let me see myself clearly. I moved to Braxton on a mid-August morning, carrying 2 old suitcases, a box packed with heavy books, and the gift my grandma had slipped into my hand before I left. A tin of homemade oatmeal cookies and a handwritten note. "You don't need to be like anyone else, Chloe. Just be strong enough to be you." The apartment I found was on the third floor of an old walk-up near the train station, about a 45-minute walk from campus. The walls were stained, the window creaked in the wind. My roommates were two engineering majors, Rachel, who slept all day, and Maya, who worked all night. We didn't get in each other's way. I got a job at Brody's Brew, a coffee shop 3 blocks from campus. I worked 3 morning shifts a week, from 5:30 to 9 a.m., just enough time to run to my first class at 9:30. On weekends, I worked the evening shift at Barnes & Hollow, a secondhand bookstore that smelled like old paper and peppermint oil, from the checkout counter. Minimum wage didn't go far after rent and printing fees, but it was better than nothing. I learned to drink watered-down coffee for breakfast and used bookstore discount vouchers to buy instant noodles instead of study guides. The first professor who made me feel like I truly belonged was Professor Lin Chen, who taught practical business thinking. During a group presentation, I pitched an updated version of my high school Labor Connect app, this time with a beta test run among college friends. After class, she watched me for a long moment and said, "Chloe, you see things differently. No fluff, just real." I assumed she said that because I wore a thrifted button-up and typed on a laptop with a missing spacebar. But the following week, she emailed me a short note. "Gentry Fund scholarship for low-income students with promising startup ideas. Deadline Friday. Apply." I stayed up 3 nights drafting a detailed proposal, had Rachel check for typos, and used the library's computers to polish the mock-up design. 6 weeks later, a thin, white envelope showed up in our shared mailbox. Inside was a letter announcing I'd been selected. The $2,000 would cover nearly the entire semester. That night, I called my grandma. The signal was weak, her voice shaky through the static. "I knew you wouldn't stop. Even if the world turned its back, you'd still keep walking." In applied statistics, I was grouped with Caleb, a third year on a full ride, known for being aloof. He often sat in the corner, arms crossed, typing at lightning speed. When I presented my data analysis on off-campus student spending habits, he stared silently for a second and said, "Didn't expect someone to use linear regression on something like that. Interesting." That was Caleb's way of giving credit, hard to spot unless you'd learned his language. I met Marianne Winters, a financial aid officer, while waiting in line to ask about tuition extensions. She recognized me from my scholarship file and said, "You should drop by here more often. We have a few emergency grants, but not many students think to ask." After that, I spent at least 1 afternoon a month submitting small aid applications, sometimes for book vouchers, sometimes for extra meal credits in the dining hall. One day, Miss Winters quietly handed me a small envelope. "The dean selected you for a non-public hardship grant. Students can only get it once. Don't tell anyone." Inside was a $300 gift card to the local supermarket. That night, I bought whole wheat bread, almond milk, 2 bags of red apples, and a bottle of hypoallergenic shampoo, something I'd skipped since the start of the semester. Caleb once asked me, "Do you ever take a break?" I looked at him, shoulders aching from just finishing a morning shift. "Oh, if I stop, everything behind me falls apart." He nodded, like someone who understood far too well. I didn't tell anyone I used a straightened wire hanger to replace my backpack strap, or that I hid lunch in my coat pockets so I wouldn't get teased in global markets for being the broke girl. But week after week, my grades stayed in the A range. Even when I nodded off in class, face still imprinted with textbook lines. I started mentoring first years. Maybe because the school needed help, or maybe Professor Chen had recommended me. Every week I met with 2 students. Sophia, who'd failed her college entry exams once, and Ben, the son of immigrants, just learning the ropes of American education. They asked how I kept it all balanced. I didn't have a perfect answer, just one sentence I truly believed. Every step, no matter how tired you are, has to mean something, because no one's clearing the path for us. You won't find that in any curriculum, but anyone who's ever lived in the shadow of someone else's expectations knows exactly what it means. Braxton wasn't gentle, but it was that very toughness that showed me true endurance doesn't come from applause. It comes from knowing exactly why you began, and no one can take that from you unless you let them. By second semester sophomore year, I was no longer invisible, not to the faculty, not to the students ahead of me. In advanced market strategies, I presented an analysis on rural consumer behavior based on real data from bookstore clients. After class, Professor Bennett, one of the toughest graders in the department, called me over. You don't speak in academic terms, but you analyze with a mind that truly understands the market. That's rare. She said it quickly, firmly, then handed me a paper. An application for a research assistant position in her post-pandemic consumer behavior team. I accepted without hesitation, even though it meant giving up one of my current jobs. The bookstore was a safe space, but I needed something new to push beyond comfort. During the first week, I sat quietly in a small third-floor meeting room in the business building, jotting down everything exchanged between the grad students and Professor Bennett. Gradually, I was assigned data checks, then survey design, and finally, drafting trial outreach strategies. While gathering insights from small businesses in Braxton's suburbs, I noticed a clear need. Many shops lacked hourly admin help, especially people with basic tech skills who could work remotely. I thought about it all evening, staring at the moldy ceiling, brain spinning like gears. By 3 a.m., I sat up, opened my laptop, and started sketching the idea. 3 weeks later, TaskLinks was born, a platform connecting college students with office skills to local small businesses in need of part-time virtual assistants. I didn't have money for a developer, so I used open-source tools to build a basic site, wrote all the content myself, and posted ads on school bulletin boards and a few Facebook groups. The first client was a small bakery run by a single mom. She needed someone to check order emails, schedule deliveries, and send payment reminders. I took the job for a month at less than half the rate of a full-time staffer. Once the workflow was stable, I brought in a classmate to take over. They were thrilled to earn flexible income. I got a small commission for the match. By 3 months in, TaskLinks had 10 business partners and 6 student workers. I didn't call it a company, just a way to create real movement between those in need and those able to help. By mid-junior year, I re-registered the platform, upgraded the brand to Links Assist Co., and shifted from virtual assistant services to digital marketing support for small businesses. The need had become obvious. They didn't just need admin help. They needed people to improve their social media presence, track customer feedback, write ad content. I recruited 2 classmates, one from communications, one from design, to build an in-house team. One wrote captions, the other edited images, and I handled contracts and client relations. Every weekend, we met at the public library, eating cheap pizza while planning our next campaign. We helped a local coffee shop grow its Instagram from 200 to 4,000 in 3 months through a series called Behind the Beans, which told stories about their baristas and brewing process. The shop's manager referred us to a friend who owned a small gym, and then the domino effect kicked in. At the end of the semester, I submitted an application for the Stanford Entrepreneurial Excellence Scholarship, an annual award for students running active startups. I included real operating data, client testimonials, workflow charts, and a 6-month development plan. In June, I got the email. I'd been selected. The award came with $15,000, enough to cover my senior year tuition and reinvest in the business infrastructure. Professor Bennett couldn't hide her pride when she saw me at the award ceremony. "Chloe, you're not just a strong student," she said. "You've used your own life to turn theory into something that serves others. That's the kind of strength no textbook can teach." Afterward, Caleb asked, "Have you thought about selling links? There are startup platforms buying out small agencies right now." I looked at him and smiled slightly. Not yet. I want to grow it with me, not to back out, but to see how far it can really go. That answer made Caleb nod, his usual cool demeanor briefly fading. Back in my room, I opened my faded laptop to tweak a presentation for the semester-end conference. Beside me was a whiteboard packed with new client meetings. Outside, the streetcar screeched past and then fell quiet. Maybe I hadn't achieved everything, but I was no longer running from the past. I was creating enough value to stand tall and keep walking, on a path I carved inch by inch. That night, rain poured down. I had just finished a video call with a new client when the doorbell rang. Peeking through the peephole, I saw Kayla. Soaked, red-eyed, holding an old backpack and a messy stack of papers. I opened the door, didn't ask a thing, just silently handed her a towel. She sat down like she'd just escaped a storm, both outside and inside. "Chloe," she said, voice choked, "I'm failing my thesis. The professor said if I don't rewrite the entire analysis in 10 days, I won't graduate." I took the papers from her. The writing was clunky, the citations unclear, the charts scattered. I understood why the professor rejected it. It wasn't that Kayla wasn't smart. It was that she'd never really had to fight for her own understanding. "Can you help me?" she asked, clinging to me like I was her last lifeline. I put the kettle on the stove. "Stay here tonight. We'll start in the morning." For the next week, I woke up at 5:30 every morning, brewed coffee, and printed reference material. At night, we sat at my tiny kitchen table while I explained key concepts, taught her how to organize her arguments, and made her rewrite every section from scratch. No copying. Kayla didn't complain. She worked hard, even turned down hangout invites from her usual friends on social media. One late night, as I was adjusting her chart on PowerPoint, she asked hesitantly, "How did you survive back then, with no one helping you?" I paused, eyes on the damp curtain. "I didn't survive," I said softly. "I learned how to make air where no one believed I deserved to breathe." Kayla stayed quiet for a long while. Then she spoke, voice low. "I used to think you chose the hard way. Turns out you never had a choice." That sentence tightened my throat. After her thesis was accepted, Kayla hugged me before leaving my apartment. "You're the first person who treated me like I could do something for myself," she said. From that day on, things between us shifted. Not in the way of childhood friendship rekindled, but something deeper, built on a shared understanding. One of us had refused to see the truth, and the other had never been allowed to say it. Kayla began refusing gifts our parents sent. One time Mom called her, saying she had already booked a flight home for the holidays. Kayla replied, "I want to buy my own ticket if I decide to come home. I need to learn how to live like an adult." Dad wasn't pleased. He sent me a short message. "Your sister's acting out again. Guess who taught her?" I didn't respond. I just sent a photo of Kayla sitting among a sea of documents, more focused than I'd ever seen her. In the spring, she moved out of the dorms, rented her own place, and got a part-time job at the campus library. One time, she sent me a photo of her first paycheck with a caption, "Not much, but I earned it." She also came to one of the seminars I presented, sat in the front row, taking careful notes like a true student. Afterward, she introduced me to her boyfriend, a human rights major who worked part-time at a nonprofit. "He thinks you're the living symbol of turning injustice around," Kayla said with a smile. "I just told him she's my sister." One night while we were cooking, Kayla said, "Mom and Dad used to love me in an easy way, but you had to learn to love yourself when no one helped you. Now I want to learn how to love others the way you learned to love yourself." I stood still after she said that, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I realized she was no longer a girl wrapped in layers of comfort. She was stepping forward, barefoot, across the same broken ground that once made me fall. Something strange happens when people finally see the truth. It doesn't just change what they see, it gives birth to something new: responsibility. Once you understand what you were told was normal was actually broken, you can't look away anymore. We didn't talk about the past anymore. No one needed to apologize for what they didn't understand back then. Quietly, we rebuilt a part of each other from fragments that once felt like burdens. Every time she walked through my door, with a bag of groceries or a draft paper to revise, I could see it clearly. There are things parents can't teach, but experience teaches thoroughly. And she was ready to learn, no longer afraid to fail. We were no longer two girls raised under the same roof, but growing up in separate worlds. Now we stood side by side, quietly building the bridge our parents never laid down. Not out of forgiveness, but out of understanding that some wounds only heal when we choose not to let them keep us apart. In May, Braxton University's graduation was held at the main square, under a clear blue sky with sunlight filtering through oak leaves. I stood among a line of graduates in caps and gowns, the tassels swaying in the breeze. Over my shoulders was a special sash, hand-stitched with my grandmother's words. "You only need enough courage to be yourself." In the guest seats, every chair was taken. I spotted Kayla sitting next to Grandma, wearing a white button-down and jeans, simple but polished. To their left were my parents. Mom wore a floral dress, hair neatly done, eyes scanning the crowd. Dad sat straight, hands placed squarely on his knees like he was in a board meeting. They arrived on time, dressed right, acting right, but there was something in their eyes that didn't fit the old script anymore. A few weeks earlier, I'd been invited to a private meeting with the graduation committee. I still remembered the dean's words. "Chloe Turner, we would like you to represent the entire School of Business and Economics as the student speaker at this year's commencement." I hadn't answered right away. A part of me feared something would be taken from me again, like it had so many times before. Trust, recognition, opportunity. But eventually I nodded. Not for applause, but to say the things I was never allowed to say. When President Wallace stepped up to the main podium, I held the note card tight in my hand. My name was first on the list. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "today we are honored to welcome our student speaker representing the graduating class, Chloe Turner, applied business major, valedictorian, founder of Links Assist Agency, and this year's Stanton Scholarship recipient." The applause began steady, then swelled. I walked onto the stage, not bowing, not looking back, eyes focused on the lights ahead. The mic was cool against my lips. I took one breath, not deep, not slow, just enough to stay grounded. I once walked into this lecture hall with a borrowed backpack and no one there to see me off. I used to believe that if I quietly made it through everything, someone might turn around and notice. But over the years, I realized there's no need for anyone to turn back. You move forward for yourself, not for anyone's gaze. Below the stage, I saw my father's eyes shift. My mother leaned over to whisper something to him, but neither of them smiled. I didn't have a solid foundation or a map drawn by someone else. What I did have were sleepless nights, mornings when my hands shook from hunger, and ideas that were laughed at. Those were what taught me how to stand tall in the wind. I glanced at Kayla. She was nodding slowly, lips pressed tight. Grandma held her hand. I didn't succeed because I was chosen. I succeeded because I chose myself, when there were countless other paths. And today, I'm graduating not just with honors, but with the belief that any limit placed on us can be shattered if we refuse to step back. As I finished, applause swept across the campus like a rising tide. President Wallace stepped back to the mic. "And now, we are honored to announce that this year's Distinguished Scholarship will be named the Chloe Turner Resilience Award, granted to students who overcome hardship without losing their identity or ambition." Whispers rippled through the crowd. A few students turned to each other. Professors stood to applaud. I saw my father's face tighten and my mother lower her gaze to the floor. "That's not all," the president continued. "Ms. Turner has also been selected as an honorary intern at Crane and Nolan, an international strategy consulting firm, where she'll begin full-time employment this coming fall. Someone in the crowd whistled. In that moment, everything that had once been denied seemed to return, not from those who took it, but through what I had earned myself. After the ceremony, Grandma was the first to hug me. She didn't say a word, just gently smoothed the sash on my shoulder, her lips mouthing, "You've truly crossed the line now." Kayla pulled me aside, whispering. They sat through the whole thing in silence, couldn't say a word. I didn't turn around, not out of fear, but because there was nothing left to search for in what I had already outgrown. A few minutes later, my dad approached, Mom by his side, both looking stiff like they were facing a panel of judges. "Congratulations, Chloe," he said in a flat tone. "Your speech was mature." I nodded, expression neutral. My mom tried to chime in. "Everyone's been asking about you, really. Aunts, uncles, they're all surprised. If only back then the past would be different." I interrupted gently, not angry, not cold. "But we don't live in ifs anymore." Kayla squeezed my hand. "Want to come to lunch with the family?" I turned to her, tapped her shoulder. "You go ahead. Today, I'm celebrating with the people who helped me make it here." Grandma smiled softly beside me, looping her arm through mine. We left the campus together, the noise fading behind us. My new apartment in Midtown had big windows overlooking the light rail, the metal wheels screeching against the tracks each morning like a quiet reminder. Today, too, you run. I moved in 3 weeks after graduation, using the bonus from the Stanton scholarship and final quarter earnings from Link's assist agency. It wasn't luxurious, just neat, well-lit, with a quiet workspace and a shelf for ideas that once got pushed aside. The job at Crane and Nolan started sooner than expected. On my first day, I wore a tailored secondhand blazer and loafers I'd found at a student fair. The department head scanned my resume and smirked. "No MBA, but you're running a real business? Good. I prefer people who've actually done things over those who only study theory." In our first team meeting, I was assigned to research consumer behavior in underserved regions with low to mid-income groups. No one expected much from me, until I presented a detailed analysis of why the last 2 campaigns had failed, along with a tiered customer segmentation model based on actual spending, not reported income. My boss only asked one thing: "Where'd you learn all this?" I replied simply, "From people who had nothing to lose." While my coworkers lunched with clients or jostled over promotions, I spent my hours refining the internal systems at Link's Assist. From a humble platform, the agency had grown into a freelance network serving nearly 30 small businesses, mostly family stores, corner shops, cafes, and repair garages across the state. I no longer managed it day to day, instead passing the reins to 2 old teammates, people who once ate pizza with me in the library and were now the operations and creative leads. By late summer, I returned to Braxton for an event hosted by the School of Business. As I crossed the campus lawn, unfamiliar students called me by name, asking for my autograph on a student magazine featuring 5 founders under 25 who inspire. I wasn't used to the attention, but I smiled, thanked them, and quietly slipped out before it turned into something I couldn't control. I used part of my study salary from Crane and Nolan to establish my own scholarship fund, the Quiet Ladder Fund, for students without family financial support who still pursued education and entrepreneurship. The first question on the application: "Have you ever been told your idea was unrealistic?" If the answer was yes, you might just be a perfect fit. The thank you letter from the first student to receive the scholarship arrived on a rainy afternoon. A young woman named Aria, a single mother studying industrial engineering, wrote, "I never believed that my quiet efforts could ever be seen by anyone. Thank you for changing that for me." A few weeks later, my mom called. Her voice was softer than it had been in past calls. No talk about money or event schedules. She simply asked, "Are you busy? Your dad would like to have lunch, just the 3 of us." I said yes, not out of obligation, but because I no longer carried the weight of anger. We met at a small diner near Grant Park. Dad wore a collared shirt, Mom brought a notebook with a few points written down like she was prepping for an interview. We misjudged things, he started. Not because we didn't think you were smart, but because we were afraid you'd fail and get hurt. I set my spoon down. I did fail. Many times. But the pain came from no one believing I deserved the chance to even try. Mom looked at me for a long moment, then reached into her purse and pulled out a photo. Me, at 8 years old, sitting at my desk, holding a stubby box of crayons, eyes fixed on a half-finished picture. Back then, I thought you'd give up soon. I didn't realize you'd turn silence into strength like that. I didn't need an apology. I needed them to understand. That was the biggest difference in our conversation that day. Back home, I opened my email and saw an invitation to join an advisory panel for a women's entrepreneurship program at another university. The subject line read, "We need more stories like yours." I never thought of mine as a special story. What I had was a journey through doubt, others, and my own, and a decision not to let it define my ability anymore. That night, I stepped out onto the balcony, a cup of tea in hand, watching the lights fade across the buildings downtown. The wind carried the damp scent of a city falling asleep, but my mind wasn't tired at all. Kayla texted, "Hey sis, I'm presenting next week. Can you do a run-through with me?" I replied, "Send me the slides. I'm free at 7 tomorrow." Grandma sent a photo of 3 rose plants she'd been growing. Under the photo, she'd written, "Each one grows in its own way. Some bloom late, but when they do, everyone turns to look." I read that line over and over. Some people grow up with love, others grow up in silence and pressure, but it's how you move forward afterward that makes the difference. Chloe's story isn't just a journey from being overlooked to being celebrated. It's living proof that true worth doesn't lie in instant recognition, but in quiet, enduring determination. She didn't just rise above the pain caused by her family. She turned it into fuel to build something meaningful for others. Chloe represents those who were once underestimated but refused to accept that fate. Those who dared to choose themselves, even when no one else did. What do you think about Chloe's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt, powerful stories about life, family, and the real value of being true to yourself.